Darkness hummed to the narrow corridor of the Star Cruiser Ardent Mercy, interrupted only by the red emergency strobes pulsing overhead. The air tasted of burnt ozone and iron, a sign that the ship's hull had been breached. Somewhere in the distance, metal groaned like a wounded beast. Commander Lynn Mara moved silently, each step calculated, each breath deliberate. Her black tactical suit clung to her like a second skin, its armor plates marked with burns and alien etchings, scars from previous encounters. She didn't look back. There was no one to follow her now. Pressed close against her chest, wrapped in a thermal wee blanket, the child stirred. Barely 3 months old, warm and impossibly delicate, he emitted a soft sound, not a cry, not a whimper. A sigh. Lynn adjusted her grip, her gloved fingers brushing the curve of his cheek. He was sleeping again, oblivious to the chaos that threatened to devour everything around them. Behind her, the shadows moved with intent. She'd seen them before, once on Veritas 6, again at the mining colony on Grange Rift. Creatures that emerged from nothing, cloaked in impossible silence, their faces a grotesque mesh of bone and dreadlock-like tendrils. Predators, not the kind that stalked for sustenance, but the kind that hunted for the thrill of it. Their technology was beyond comprehension, their morality non-existent. The first one had appeared 12 minutes ago, tearing through the ship's perimeter like it was paper. No alarms, no warning, just bodies, shredded and steaming. Lynn had watched Captain Rao vanish beneath a blur of claws and plasma. Tactical squads dissolved within seconds. Yet she survived not by skill or weapon, but by something that couldn't be measured. She'd made no effort to fight back. Just run, not from fear, though fear had certainly settled deep in her spine, but from something instinctual, something animal, a sense that resistance would only accelerate death. Now, she could feel it again. The temperature shifted. The faint buzz of the air vents cut out. Behind her, a shadow thickened, gained mass. The corridor's ambient red glow trembled against armor too reflective, too alien. She didn't turn. She just stood there, still as stone, her arms locked around a child like a bastion. A clicking sound echoed, low, chattering, almost curious. The language of hunters. Lynn slowly exhaled. "I know you're there." Silence answered. She could hear it breathing now. Close. Its breath was heavy, reptilian, mechanical at the edges. Then came the sound of something being lowered. A weapon. Plasma cannon, most likely. Her heart didn't race. It should have. But in that moment, she felt something deeper than terror. A recognition. This was the end. She turned. It towered over her. 8 feet of armored menace, claws flexed, mandibles twitching. Its eyes, if you could call them that, gleamed beneath its biomask. But it wasn't attacking. The cannon, though primed, wasn't aimed. It simply watched. She raised the baby slightly, as if presenting him. "You came for blood," she said quietly, "but I have none left to give." For a moment, nothing moved. Then the predator tilted its head. Slowly, unnaturally, it stepped forward, enough to make her legs lock. She could smell it now. Ozone and decay. The cannon whined as it powered down. Its arm relaxed. The creature knelt, not in reverence, but in what might have been observation. It looked at the child. The baby stirred, made a gurgling sound, and opened his eyes. Large, brown, unafraid. He stared directly into the predator's mask. Something changed. Lynn saw it. Subtle and perceptible, but real. The predator recoiled slightly, mandibles fluttering. It emitted another clicking sequence, this one softer, almost hesitant. A full minute passed. Then it stood, straightened its shoulders, and turned away. Lynn watched in disbelief as it disappeared into the shadows it had emerged from. Not a sound, not a mark. She didn't move for several seconds. The baby began to fuss, his small hands clenching and unclenching beneath the blanket. Her knees gave out, and she sank to the floor, not from exhaustion, though her muscles burned, but from the weight of what had just happened. She stared down at her son. His breathing had never changed. His heartbeat, she imagined, had never faltered. "Why?" she whispered, brushing a strand of her own hair from his forehead. "What did it see in you?" She remembered the incident files from Veritas 6. The single civilian spared, a boy. Reports dismissed it as a systems glitch. On Grange Rift, a miner left untouched while others were eviscerated. He'd been holding his daughter. Patterns. Data. No one had taken it seriously. Until now. The intercom crackled faintly. Static. Then a voice. Barely a whisper through the damage. Commander Mar, anyone left? Lynn crawled toward the nearest panel and pressed her thumb against the comm interface. Alive, she managed, voice hoarse. Just me and the child. Silence. Then a rush of static and coughing. We thought you were, Hal? She looked down at her son. His eyes were closed again. Peaceful. Serene. I don't know, she said, but something made it stop. A pause. Evac vessel incoming. ETA 12 minutes. Hang tight, Commander. She leaned back against the cold bulkhead, drawing the child closer. Outside the corridor's viewport, the stars turned slowly, indifferent to what just occurred. But Lynn knew something fundamental had shifted, not just for her, not just for the ship, but perhaps for humanity itself. Something ancient and brutal had looked into the eyes of an infant and chosen to walk away. And that, she realized, was the beginning of a much larger story. She closed her eyes and waited for the sound of salvation. The med bay aboard the Celestial Vow was quiet, sterile, too brightly lit for Lynn Mara's liking. The scent of antiseptic lingered like an afterthought, hanging in the recycled air. She sat on the edge of a diagnostic bed, posture straight despite the dull ache winding through her shoulders. Across from her, Dr. Arvin Lowe adjusted the data slate in his hands, his brow furrowed with restrained disbelief. Between them, in a pod-shaped cradle, the child slept, unchanged, untouched by trauma, as though nothing had happened. You're certain? Lynn said, watching the doctor's expression rather than his screen. I've run the scans 3 times, Arvin replied, his voice steady but low. There's nothing physically unusual about him. No genetic modifications. No abnormal neural activity. He's just a baby. A baby who made a predator back down. Arvin didn't respond immediately. He glanced at the boy, then at Lynn. There's a theory, fringe science at best, that some species can detect empathic resonance, a nonverbal, involuntary transmission of emotional state. It's never been proven, mostly discussed in xenopsych circles. Lynn folded her arms. You think he's broadcasting emotions? I think he's radiating something the predator recognized, Arvin said, something that made it hesitate. She looked down at her son, sleeping soundly beneath a layer of thermal mesh. His small hands were curled into fists, his chest rising and falling in a rhythm too gentle to disturb the silence. Arvin stepped closer. You know what empathy is, in theory. But in practice, it's more than emotion. It's pattern recognition, shared perception, instinct. We've always believed it was a weakness, a biological trait that made us vulnerable. But maybe that's exactly what protected you. Lynn leaned forward slightly. Not me. Him. Arvin hesitated, then nodded. Him. They were interrupted by a soft chime. Lieutenant Voss, young and fresh-faced despite the week-old stubble on his chin, stood at the threshold of the med bay, clutching a tablet like it might slip through his fingers. You're going to want to see this, he said. The 3 of them moved into the observation deck, where a hollow display hovered above a circular table. Voss tapped a command, and footage played, grainy, stuttering, but clear enough. It was surveillance from the Ardent Mercy. Camera feed from Corridor K7. Lynn watched herself appear on screen, child in arms, moving with deliberate calm down the blood-red hallway. Then the predator emerged, 8 feet of muscle and dread, its weapon at the ready. The room fell into a tense hush. The moment of contact was replayed. The predator's stance, the tilt of its head, the non-aggressive posture. Lynn standing her ground, the child looking up. Then the retreat. Voss zoomed in on the predator's face. There. See that flicker? Its mask's retinal interface activated. It's scanning. Arvin rubbed his chin. And it chooses not to fire. According to biometric readings, its adrenaline levels spike, then plummet. Fight or flight response. followed by disengagement. Fear, Lynn asked. No, Arvin replied. Recognition. The footage ended. No one spoke for a long moment. Voss eventually broke the silence. We checked the archives. There have been at least 4 other similar encounters. Sparse data, always dismissed. In each, the predator either retreats or refrains from killing. In every case, a child was present. No weapons, no threat posture. Lynn processed the information slowly. So it's not just my son. Could be something shared, Arvin suggested. A signal, a quality not tied to DNA or physical features. Empathy isn't just felt. It can be perceived, even by something alien. She returned to medbay alone, the others scattering to their respective duties. The child was awake now, eyes open and watching, not blankly, but with unnerving awareness, as if he knew more than his infant body allowed him to express. Lynn sat beside him, lowered her voice. What are you? The child blinked once, then smiled. Not wide, not knowing, but enough to tighten the breath in her lungs. She leaned closer, feeling the warmth of him, the innocent clarity of his presence. There was no fear in him, no residual trauma. The world had shifted, and he remained untouched by it. She remembered what she had felt in that hallway. Not courage, but calm. A calm that hadn't come from her. It had come from him, as if it had been the still point in the chaos, the anchor that kept the predator from striking. Sleep eluded her that night. She sat by the window in her quarters, watching stars drift like ghosts across the void. Her son slept nearby in a portable cot, the soft hum of environmental controls lulling him. She thought of the alien's pause, the moment when death had been certain, yet never came. She thought of the look. If you could call it that, the predator gave the child. Not pity, not mercy, but respect, maybe even reverence. What if humanity had been looking for strength in the wrong direction all along? What if this child and others like him represented an evolution not of the body, but a perception? In a galaxy filled with claws, blades, and instinctual violence, perhaps it was a quiet, unassuming presence of empathy or connection that disrupted the ancient equation of predator and prey. A soft chirp signaled a message. She opened the holotext. A note from Arvin. Subject. Preliminary neural analysis suggests further study. Message. Lynn, I think we've only scratched the surface. I've isolated patterns in his neural oscillations. There's coherence between limbic activity and prefrontal integration I haven't seen before, not even in prodigies. It's as if his brain is constantly harmonizing, not just interpreting emotional states, but projecting them. This isn't just empathy. It's a frequency. She read the last sentence twice. A frequency. Outside the window. A comet arched across space, a luminous arc fading into the dark. Lynn returned to the cot, crouched beside the child, and brushed her hand over his head. He didn't wake. He just sighed again, content in a world that no longer made sense. The unanswered questions pressed against her mind like pressure in deep water. If he was broadcasting something, was it deliberate or instinct? Was it learned or something born into him? If predators responded to it with restraint, what would other species do? What would humans do? Could something so subtle, so profoundly human, become the most powerful deterrent in the known universe? She didn't know, but she knew this. The war had changed the moment that creature chose to walk away, and the child who had never cried during that entire ordeal might hold the key to an entire species' survival. Somewhere deep in space, something had recognized a force it couldn't conquer. Now the rest of the galaxy would have to reckon with it. 3 days after the Ardent Mercy incident, Lynn Mara found herself seated across from a council of beings who weren't all human. The United Galactic Forum had convened an emergency session aboard the orbital station Helix Prime, a hollowed asteroid turned neutral diplomatic ground. The chamber was immense, ringed with artificial gravity and thick with tension. Delegates murmured, translated voices weaving into a dull hum of concern and skepticism. In front of her, a translucent display hovered, projecting looping footage of the Predator's retreat. "Commander Mara," came the clipped voice of Envoy Delos, a Sithri representative with opalescent skin and eyes like liquid chrome. We have all seen the footage. What we require now is clarity. Why did it spare you? Lynn's gaze shifted to the baby in her lap, now swaddled in the same thermal weave, resting in undisturbed sleep. She spoke quietly, yet firmly, her voice echoing in the acoustically perfect chamber. It didn't spare me. It spared him. A low ripple passed through the delegates. Even the more stoic species, like the Draken Collective, known for their emotionless logic, seemed unsettled. Lynn continued, "Every encounter we've documented with these predators follows a consistent pattern. Overwhelming aggression, tactical supremacy, indiscriminate killing. Until now, the moment it saw the child, it stopped, it studied him, and it left." Delos leaned forward, silver fingers steepled beneath his chin. "And you believe this reaction was not coincidental?" "I believe it was deliberate." General Ardo Vale, Terran Defense Coalition liaison and veteran of the Trinar conflict, scoffed. "A baby halted an apex predator with a glance? Do you realize how absurd that sounds?" "I do," Lynn replied. "And I watched it happen anyway." Arvin Lowe stepped forward from the shadows, his data slate casting a pale glow over his face. "She's not wrong. I've been analyzing the child's neural output. There's a consistent frequency in his synaptic pulses, harmonic resonance, not typical for his age. It's not random. It's organized, purposeful." Delos tilted his head. "You're implying this child is communicating. Without speech, without intent. Not communication in the way we understand it," Arvin said. "It's more like a field, an emotional echo. It affects the autonomic responses in anyone nearby. Lowered aggression, heightened empathy, disarmament of violent intent. A defense mechanism?" Someone asked in a far circle. Arvin nodded. "Possibly. Or the early stages of a new cognitive evolution." Murmurs rose again. Lynn glanced across the room, noticing that the Draken delegate, who had remained silent thus far, was observing the child closely, for eyes narrowing. Then the delegate spoke in their rigid mechanical cadence. "We intercepted similar behavioral anomalies during our covert study of the predator species on Obsidian Reach. A single incident. One juvenile human survivor. No physical injuries. The predator disengaged without explanation. We recorded residual energetic fluctuation in the child's neural field. Minor, but present." Lynn's pulse quickened. So it wasn't just her son. There were others. She turned to Arvin, who had already begun pulling up archival reports. "This isn't an isolated mutation," he said. "It may be rare, but not unique." General Vale folded his arms. "Let's assume you're right. Then what? We breed an army of empathic infants and hope monsters leave us alone." Lynn didn't flinch. "No, but we acknowledge that humanity's most underestimated trait, emotional resonance, may be its greatest offense. These predators operate by a code we barely understand. They hunt strength, yes, but they respect something deeper. Vulnerability that doesn't cower. Peace that doesn't plead." Delos spoke again, his voice now contemplative. "If these children are radiating an energy that alters predator behavior, what happens when others learn of it? When weaponization becomes inevitable?" The room fell into silence. That was the fear. The danger was no longer the predators. It was what humans might do once they realized they had something powerful in their grasp. Lynn stood slowly. "That's why I came here. Not to offer him as a weapon. Not to parade him as a miracle. But to ask for protection. Not just for him, but for all the others like him. Because if we fail to shield this, if we try to control or replicate it, we'll destroy the very thing that made the predator turn away." The delegates looked at her, then at the child, and for the first time, the room felt quiet, not with tension, but with understanding. Later that day, Lynn stood at the viewport in her temporary quarters, watching Helix Prime rotate slowly against a tapestry of stars. Her son lay in a bassinet nearby, babbling softly to himself. She wondered if he sensed the gravity of what had just unfolded. He seemed content, as always, untouched by the storm forming around him. Arvin joined her, arms folded, eyes scanning the station beyond the glass. "They're going to vote on a protection directive," he said. "You made an impression." She nodded, though her expression remained tight. That's not what worries me. He raised an eyebrow. It's the ones we haven't found yet. The other children. If they're out there, someone else might find them first. Someone who sees them not as symbols of peace, but as assets. Arvin's mouth tightened. I'll start building a network. Quietly, there are researchers on Farah 9 sympathetic minds. We can track the anomalies, cross-reference regions where predator encounters ended differently. Lynn's eyes didn't leave the stars. We'll need more than researchers. We'll need guardians. You're volunteering? She glanced at her son. I'm not sure I have a choice. He nodded. Neither do I. In the dark beyond the station, somewhere on the outer rim, a signal pulsed in a language no human had ever spoken, but which some had begun to feel. It was not a declaration of war, nor an invitation for peace. It was a recognition. Change had begun, and something ancient was listening. The predator had walked away, but it was watching. The child was older now, just barely walking, his steps unsure but determined, toddling to the overgrown sanctuary of the Terran Exobiological Preserve on Yalara 3. The jungle canopy filtered golden light, and the air shimmered with heat and alien pollen. Birds that weren't birds called through the trees. Insects the size of her hand hovered near strange blossoms that pulsed with a slow, living rhythm. Lynn walked behind him, close enough to intervene, far enough to let him explore. He didn't wander far. He never did. It was like he understood things without needing them explained. Space, presence, the unspoken rules between mother and child, between one mind and another. You feel it, don't you? She murmured. He paused and turned toward her, expression unreadable. He hadn't spoken a full word yet, but she no longer expected him to. Words were crude things next to the atmosphere he projected, the emotional resonance that warmed the air when he was near. It wasn't always comfort. Sometimes it was awe, sometimes fear, but it was always connection, pure and unfiltered. She knelt beside him, brushing a leaf from his shoulder. Something's coming. He didn't answer, but he nodded. They'd been hiding for nearly a year. Not from the predators, the deadly alien race now largely dormant along the frontier, but from humans, or rather, those who had decided the child represented a new kind of tactical advantage. The first attempt to take him had come quietly. A staged meta-emergency, a falsified quarantine. Lynn had burned through 2 identities, a stolen starhopper, and every ounce of trust she'd earned in the fleet just to get away. Since then, she had been building something with Arvin low, something scattered and secret, a quiet web of safe zones and watchers, not fighters, not scientists, caretakers, protectors of the few children like hers who had begun to surface. They called them harmonics, not a mutation, not an evolution. Something older, Arvin believed, a trait buried in humanity's collective past, buried under layers of fear and conquest, a gift the species had forgotten it carried. Until now, the air shifted. Lynn stood, pulse tightening. The forest had gone silent. A soft chirp echoed from her wristband, coded signal. Someone was approaching the perimeter. She scooped the boy into her arms and retreated into the dense underbrush, moving silently along a pre-cleared path. Minutes later, she emerged into the clearing where Arvin waited beside a newly landed skimmer. His face was pale, lips tight. You felt it too? He asked. She nodded. How close? They're already in orbit. 3 ships. Civilian registry. But the scan profiles are military, Defense Coalition signatures masked under private contractors. No attempt to contact us. They're here for him. Arvin looked down at the boy, who watched the adults with unnerving calm. They know. Somehow, they've narrowed it down. Maybe they followed the neural field emissions. We knew the tech was coming. Lynn stared past the trees. We have to move. There's another problem. Arvin pulled a device from his pack. We intercepted a burst transmission an hour ago, untraceable origin, but the language was predator, not directed at us. A general signal, wideband. What did it say? He hesitated. It said, "He is not yours to keep." The words hung in the air like a warning. Lynn looked at her son, felt the wave of tranquility emanating from him. And beneath it, deeper, a thrum, something dormant, like a frequency tuning itself for something distant but inevitable. She stepped toward the skimmer. We're not letting them take him. Not the humans. Not the predators. Not anyone. Arvin climbed in after them, running his fingers across the console. The engine spun to life with a low growl. As they lifted into the air, Lynn glanced through the viewport at the forest below, remembering every hidden relay, every camouflage net, every sensor node they planted. It wouldn't stop the ones who were coming, but it might delay them. Set course for Varela Station, she said. Arvin blinked. You think the four will help us now? After we vanished? They owe me, Lynn said coldly. And if they won't help, they'll at least make noise. Enough to scatter attention while we regroup. The skimmer broke through clouds, the stars coming into view like scattered glass. The child nestled against her, not afraid, never afraid. He raised a hand toward the viewport, palm flat against the glass, as if he felt something out there. Lynn followed his gaze, and her heart stuttered. A shadow slipped across the stars. Not a ship, not human. Predator. It moved like it had always been there, cloaked by more than tech, hidden in the folds of space itself. Lynn stared, adrenaline flaring, but the boy didn't tremble. He stared right back. And then, impossibly, the thing dipped its head just once and vanished. Arvin exhaled shakily. Did it just bow? I think so, she said. Her voice trembled more than she wanted it to. The boy finally spoke, so soft it was barely audible. Watching. She stared at him. Who's watching? He looked at her and smiled, not with innocence, with understanding, with the certainty of someone who had already seen the shape of things to come. They are. And Lynn knew, then, that this wasn't just about survival anymore. This wasn't about predators or governments or even protection. This was about what came next. The child was not just a shield. He was a signal. The galaxy had taken notice. And whatever came from the dark, from the edges of extinction and evolution, it would find humanity no longer the fragile species hiding behind steel and fire. It would find them changed, not by force, but by something far more powerful. Empathy that could stop a killer mid-strike. Presence that could command respect across species. The harmonic hum of a future already arriving.